everyone, and thank you so much for all of you who are signing on and joining us for the SCCPDS Career Catalyst webinar, Getting the Most Out of Your Fellowship. I'm Laura Haines. I'm a program director at the University of California, San Diego, and I'll be one of your co-moderators today.
And I'm Pat McGonagill. I'm a trauma surgeon and program director in the Surgical Critical Care Fellowship at the University of Iowa. Really excited to have an opportunity to be part of this today.
And so Pat and I will be co-moderating, and so our panelists here today, if I can introduce them. We have Dr. Jessica Masch. She is a current second-year fellow here at UC San Diego. She's going to talk to you about some pearls as far as starting your fellowship and things to kind of look for to get out of fellowship. We also have Dr. Dan Kohn. He is a faculty member at the University of Iowa who will be providing us with some tools and advice on teaching and leadership and learning some of those skills in fellowship. And then we have Dr. Lisa Knowlton at Stanford. She's an assistant program director there, and she will be providing you with pearls of wisdom as far as things that we as program directors hope you get out of your fellowship. So we are going to go ahead and kick it off with Dr. Masch. Dr. Masch, if you want to share your slides and we'll get going.
All right. All right, can everyone see my screen? Okay, beautiful. As Dr. Haines said, I'm Jessie Masch. I'm one of the brand new second-year fellows at UCSD. And I've been tasked with speaking with you all briefly about what to expect when starting your new fellowship and a little bit about what the process is like in transitioning to the role of fellow. As a disclosure, I am not an expert on this topic by any means, nor have I received any formal training, but I am a current fellow who's still in training, and I am going through a transition currently. But because I trained for residency somewhere very different than where I came for fellowship, I do have insight into assimilating into a new place and practice model, and have learned some things along the way to share with you all. So I think that a common misconception is that when you finish your residency, you have a whole month off and it's going to be like a vacation and you're going to have all the time in the world. But in reality, there's a million other things going on, and you probably don't end up having quite as much time as you thought you would for preparing for fellowship and actually going over surgical critical care things and being ready, because you have a lot of other things going on. And so you kind of end up feeling like you get thrown in, as some of you are likely beginning to experience. And I think it's a really good example of just the true big fish in a little pond scenario, because you're a chief resident, you know everything really well, you know how everything works, you know where everything is, and you kind of run the service very easily. And it gets, while general surgery residency is obviously difficult in its own way, things get easier for you and you kind of forget how it used to feel. And then you're kind of a small fish in a big pond again, and you don't really know how anything is going on, and you're trying to rapidly figure it out and rapidly figure out how to be a leader. So here's a few things that I personally found uncomfortable about the beginning of fellowship. I thought it was a little bit of a challenge to learn the expectations of your role on the different services, whether it be in the ICU or if you rotate on the trauma services, take call, what you need to do, what you need to supervise, etc. Learning the roles of the different members of the team. If you have APPs with you, for example, which I didn't have in residency, and kind of learning what they do and what their role is. And then you're kind of back at square one. You really have to gain the trust of your attending physicians and learn their different styles and expectations. And that is a little bit of an ego check after having been somewhere for 5 to 7 years where everyone knew you well, they trusted you, they knew you were reliable. And, you know, while you had good letters, now you've got to sort of show these new faculty members and new attendings, you know, how good you are, which is a little stressful. And then at the same time, you're obviously trying to learn how things work at a new institution, and you're going to be feeling lost, both literally and figuratively. There's a lot going on. Everything's different. And then also you're like not sure where the cafeteria is, or if there's a code in a certain unit, you don't know how to get there. And all that's stressful too. And then the other thing is that it's a relatively short time to make a great impression before your job search begins. And that part is a little bit stressful as well, because you obviously want the support of your program, your fellowship program, when you are starting your job search. So I tried to boil it down to a couple of tips and pieces of advice that I would have and give to myself a year ago for getting the most out of your fellowship and sort of ease your transition from a role of a chief resident into that of a fellow. The first piece of advice I would give is to get comfortable being uncomfortable. It's no one's favorite thing to do, but you're likely a lot more set in your ways than you would ever realize from your residency experience. So when you're expected to do things differently and manage things differently, it's probably going to feel pretty uncomfortable at first. You'll see things that you're like, whoa, wait a second, we did it different. And, you'll want to resist it. But learning to be uncomfortable or comfortable in that discomfort is going to be key for you sort of moving forward and growing into your fellowship. Being in a team leadership role is a little awkward when you're still learning the ropes. So, residents, medical students are going to be coming to you asking questions, and you're sort of going to be, oh, well, I don't know what we would typically do in that situation, but you also want to be somebody who's assertive and reliable and makes decisions. So that part is a little bit uncomfortable at first. I think it's important to just pay a lot of attention and ask a lot of questions in that role in order to kind of figure out how things work typically and get more out of that. Another thing that's very uncomfortable at the beginning is that you probably forgot, or at the very least suppressed the memory of, how bad it felt at the beginning of residency when nobody really trusted you. The nurses were kind of going above you to your senior residents to ask questions. Maybe the scrub techs were not nice to you because they didn't know who you were and they didn't realize you were, a resident. I think all that was challenging at the beginning of residency. And you kind of, if you're somewhere new, it's very possible that you'll be in that same boat at the beginning. It's going to take a little bit to sort of gain people's trust and become a familiar face. So my advice for that is to be bold, be friendly, introduce yourself to everyone that you interact with, every nurse, every scrub tech, every circulator, every other attending that you encounter, and be really present in your clinical area. Don't just round and then go disappear in your office for the rest of the day. Check on your patients again, talk to the nurses about what's been going on. The more you become familiar in the area, the more quickly you become somebody that people will be coming to. And then again, asking questions, despite what might be ingrained in us from residency training, it's never a sign of weakness. You're in a new environment, and asking questions is always going to be better than making an assumption or making the wrong call. Second piece of advice I have is to be a sponge. Fellowship is an opportunity to expand your toolbox. So you're going to have a lot of exposure to new things, new medications, protocols, operative techniques, and familiarity with these is going to give you an edge clinically. So pay a lot of attention to how your colleagues approach different parts of your job, whether it be sign out or different presentations, M&M, because that will give you an idea of what the expectations for you will be when you're in that role. And then just learn as much as you can, absorb what everyone else is doing and saying around you. And remember that even if you don't like it, it's still good to learn it. And it's ultimately up to you what you take and leave for your own future practice. The third piece of advice I have is to do your best to seek out opportunities, or to take the opportunities that are given to you and be aggressive in seeking them out. This is something that's super easy to say you're going to do at the beginning of the year because you're excited and eager to be in fellowship. Realistically, a lot of the times when you get these opportunities, they feel like more work when you're already busy and tired and you have a lot of clinical responsibilities and educational obligations. But you really got to go back and remember your why. You chose to pursue a fellowship for a reason, and you only have a short amount of time to set yourself up for the career you want. So being aggressive and pursuing these opportunities and dedicating your free time to them is going to boost your CV and pave the way for the job you envision. And it's really important to be using that time to do that. So find mentors early. Don't be afraid to ask your faculty about opportunities for research, education, QI projects, or different networking opportunities. I think a good thing to do at the beginning of fellowship is to spend some time thinking about the gaps that exist in your residency training and then work on filling them. Every residency has its own strengths and weaknesses, and fellowship is an opportunity to kind of polish yourself for practice. It takes a little bit of humility and self-awareness to reflect on these areas, but it's a good idea. And you should be treating your fellowship as a chance to focus on weaknesses and making them into strengths. So it could be something simple like didn't have great airway experience and you might want to aggressively work with anesthesia and try to get a bunch of intubations, or maybe you did all percutaneous trachs and you really want to learn to do open ones. This is the time to kind of focus on things where you're like, hey, I didn't get a lot of experience with that, and be aggressive about going after those things. The fifth piece of advice should be obvious, but it's very important. It's very important to be nice, especially in fellowship. Kindness is always going to help get the right people in your corner. That will make your life a lot easier. And that includes everyone: residents, board runners, scrub techs, circulators, medical students, APPs, and nurses, and of course your attendings. But being nice will always get you ahead. And finally, stay humble. You know a lot to have gotten where you are today, but you are still here as a learner and you have a lot more to learn. Fellowship is an opportunity to cultivate your leadership skills as well. So kind of coming in and appreciating that you have a ways to go in that aspect of your career is also important. I had a attending at my residency who always used to say, there is no task beneath a chief resident, and I have tried to bring that into my life as a fellow. You know, sometimes you'll find yourself doing things that might feel below your pay grade to help out your team when they're overwhelmed with consults or someone's sick and you're throwing in an A-line for them, you know, while they're trying to prepare for rounds or writing a few notes. I think that it's really important to be a good example of what teamwork and leadership looks like. And I think an important aspect of that is staying humble and helping out for the greater good as well. Couple of other pearls that I have very quickly in terms of easing the transition. You are, of course, inherently a product of where you came from, but be open to doing things differently and be flexible in your thinking during fellowship. Rely on everyone around you to learn how things work and learn to integrate into the system more quickly, including your attendings, the residents, your co-fellows, and all the ancillary staff. You should come into fellowship with the mentality of a leader, but remain humble. A different piece of advice I would say is to try to take your oral boards early. When you found out that you passed, it will very quickly, your brain span for holding all the general surgery information will dwindle as you focus more on surgical critical care. So taking it early will be huge for you. Remember to rely on your loved ones and your support system. None of you would be where you are today without them from residency. And don't forget to prioritize your wellness and hobbies outside of work. Remember that the more uncomfortable you are, the more growth you're probably experiencing, and plan to leave fellowship as a better physician and surgeon than when you started. Those are my small pearls of advice that I can give you at the beginning of your fellowship. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Great. If anybody has questions throughout, I forgot to mention this, please do put them in the chat. We'll be answering questions at the end and kind of moderating that. But in the meantime, we will transition over to Dr. Kohn. Dr. Kohn, we're ready for you to provide us with your pearls of wisdom.
Hi guys, I'm Daniel, one of the new faculty here at the University of Iowa. So what we're going to be kind of chatting about today is learning to be a leader and educate residents from the perspective of a recent grad / new faculty. So, you know, being an educator is a process, and it's a process that I'm still learning. But I think, you know, everybody in the audience and everybody on the panel, when they were in residency, there was always that attending that you wished you could educate, like that you kind of emulated. So I think when you become a fellow or you become a new staff, when you've graduated, you really have to seek mentorship early. Luckily, I had great mentors here as a fellow and even as a staff now that I try and emulate when I try and educate residents and fellows. I think residents, it's a little bit easier and it's a little more difficult as a new grad. You know, when you're a new grad, you kind of want to feel like you know everything and you don't want to be wrong, and you want to be that guy. But I think understanding that it's a process and it's a a journey is really helpful. One thing that I found helpful is commiseration. As a recent grad and new faculty, you know, we understand what the residents and the fellows are going through kind of maybe a little bit better than the older faculty. So establishing that trust and really commiserating with them and maybe telling war stories of your time during residency or your time during fellowship or what kind of worked with you is a great way to establish trust. But you know, as I've grown as an educator here, I've kind of defined some domains that make effective educators. One of them is the attitudes intrinsic to the actual educator themselves. If you want to be a good educator, you have to want to educate. And that takes patience, kind of piggybacking on what Dr. Masch said. You got to be nice. You got to be non-malignant. You got to be non-threatening. And it's difficult to learn different people's learning habits. So I think an effective way to, at least that I've learned from my mentors and viewing things that worked well, was setting expectations early. A lot of teaching happens on rounds. A lot of teaching happens in the operating room. And I think as a new fellow, I think you should really hit the ground running. Kind of what Jess was saying, that I view fellowship also as more of a finishing school. Like you hone your skills, and you know, here at the university, we always say we got 1 year with you. So we got to take the training wheels off early. So as a new fellow, I think it's important that you own that. And on rounds, you take that autonomy early, and you run rounds as early as you can. Another attitude that is intrinsic is you have to have the desire to teach. You have to want to be an educator. And if you have the desire to do something, you'll probably end up being pretty good at it. Another domain that I've kind of identified is behaviors that are intrinsic to the actual educator themselves. I find that setting expectations early on, especially when you're teaching medical students, residents, fellows, is really important. You know, I personally have high expectations of my trainees. And you know, if you're patient and you set those expectations, you're not going to be disappointed and you're not going to be frustrated. Feedback is also very important. I think seeking feedback from the trainees that you're teaching and offering constructive feedback is imperative. You know, we always get these, you know, surveys that you have to fill out about your trainees, and you talk about weaknesses, and I think you have to write more than continue reading. You know, I kind of fell into that as a new trainee, that like, you know, you don't want to make them feel bad. You don't want to, you know, bruise their ego, because, you know, they're trying to learn too. But, you know, what I've done, especially in the ICU when I'm the attending and when I was a fellow, is that every Friday when we had new students or a new block, I would pull each trainee aside, and they would provide me with their feedback on my educational, you know, how I've provided education, and I would provide them with, you know, what I thought was poignant feedback for them. Another domain is kind of that educator-learner relationship. I think it's kind of going back to commiseration that kind of builds your trust a little bit earlier, but I think it's really important that you click with your residents and with your trainees. I'm still kind of finding the balance of being colloquial and professional at the same time, which is a difficult balance to strike. But I think it's super important that you get to know your trainees on a personal basis. You know, here in the ICU at UIHC, we have different specialties that rotate through us. with us. We have, OMFS, anesthesia, ortho, ENT, family medicine that rotates through our ICU. And all of them have different goals and learning objectives. So obviously we have a bias of being a surgeon, but I think it's important to take a step back and really really try and find out what they are trying to get out of the rotation or out of their education, and kind of mold your teaching to them. With medical students, they have these shelf exams that they have to take. And, we have educational things in our ICU for, to help them with their written test. But I think it's also important that you do little chalk talks. And you set the expectation in the beginning of the week that, we're going to be kind of assigning topics based on what you want to learn or what you find interesting. And, just a little 5-minute informal board talk. You can even write it. What we do, we use the dry erase markers on the glass. And it's informal and it's formal at the same time. And you get a lot of good learning from there. And something that I was taught in residency is what we call leveling up, like a graduated autonomy, more so in the operating room than in the ICU. But even so, with our ICU fellows, we encourage them to take the training wheels off early and show us what you got, show us how you educate, and run rounds and provide feedback afterwards so that you can allow them to level up. So I'm very lucky that I found really great mentorship in residency and in fellowship and as a staff. And I guess the takeaway point is find that attending that you like learning from and that everybody likes learning from, and emulate their teaching style and kind of make it your own. As a chief resident or a fellow, you have a breadth of knowledge that you're a fountain of knowledge, and it can be overwhelming at times to just dump all that knowledge on people. But I think that if you allow leveling up, commiserate, find mentors, you can be a really good, effective educator to a lot of different learning styles.
Good. Thank you, Dr.
Fantastic,
Kohn. That's
Dan.
great.
Thank you so much. Awesome. A lot of great tips about educating and when learning to educate as a fellow and to interact with people. We're now going to transition to Dr. Knowlton, who's going to talk to us about learning your why and how to become an expert and leader. So take it away.
Well, thank you so much. And this is a great segue from the prior two speakers. I think we have a lot of common themes in our talks, but I was asked to focus a little bit on that transition from fellowship and then early career faculty, and how you really kind of find your niche in our profession and develop expertise and leadership skills. So it's all really boils down to kind of knowing yourself very well and knowing what motivates you and your why of why we're doing this. So when we think about leadership, I think people have different images that pop into their mind. That I included a few gifts here from one of my favorite shows, Succession, down below. But in acute care surgery and surgical critical care, we're asked to be leaders really across so many different areas, whether it's in the OR, and our clinical work, or some of our administrative roles that we take on during training, and then extending certainly into our careers as faculty. And then beyond our own institution and the education that we do locally, really being involved, in the academic kind of professional society scene as well, through national organizations such as EAST, AAST, and SCCPDS. Leadership really can come in many different forms. I think there's increasing expectation that's being placed on all of us to lead and across all of these areas as modern leaders. But how most of us really feel is that we're probably not really sure where to start, because we never really get formal leadership training in residency and fellowship, and then you're just expected to kind of juggle all of these things as you progress, not only in your training, but then in your career. So it's really important to kind of understand and have a clear sense of what your future goals are, as well as your aspirations. And even though they can feel out of reach, finding, those appropriate people to talk to so that you could start to kind of crystallize those ideas for yourself. And as you progress in your training as well, I think you shift a little bit out of that I'm just in survival mode of residency, and where am I going to, find my next job, et cetera, because fellowship is so short-lived. That then you have a little bit more time to start to think about all of these things as you take your first faculty position. But there's really no guarantees in any of this process, and I don't think that it becomes any easier. So I think the take-home message, if you get anything from these slides and this talk today, is learning to embrace uncertainty. And I think especially in our field that's so unpredictable clinically as well, I think you need to kind of develop those skill sets and learning to navigate challenging situations. So just a bit of background about me. I'm 6 years out now from fellowship. I grew up in Canada and was fortunate to train in two beautiful cities in Montreal and then Vancouver, British Columbia. Did my Master of Public Health during my professional development research time, and then I came to Stanford for my surgical critical care fellowship, where I ended up staying on as faculty. And so in all of this, if you asked me, a few years ago, if I would have had any concept that I would have taken on these varying roles, I would have probably said that you're crazy. But life moves very quickly as an attending and a faculty, and professional development continues to happen longitudinally. And I put these up here just to give you a sense of the fact that once you transition into that early career stage, then there's expectations put on you across multiple different areas. And I've been able to take on leadership roles both in the clinical realm and the surgical ICU, as well as education through our fellowship. And then research is a huge part of my passion and my why, stemming from my public health degree. So that was something that I really wanted to put front and center in my career. And I've been able to grow my own research lab and then take on some administrative leadership roles. And then lastly, we'll touch a little bit upon, the significant contribution that you all can have, even starting now as fellows within professional organizations, to really kind of extend the impact of your leadership beyond your local institution. So when you think about the pathway to leadership and what is this concept really of becoming an expert, we all kind of know one when we see it, that clinician that's been in practice for 20 years and just has a great clinical intuition about them, or maybe has a tremendous number of academic accolades, or is a fantastic educator. But how do you really get to that point? And I think the pathway to surgical leadership now is becoming more fluid than it was in the past. And being a leader in surgery is taking on so many different forms because healthcare systems are facing unprecedented challenges, and our surgical landscape is so rapidly evolving, especially with progression of technology and AI and whatnot. So I think it's no longer really sufficient to be an expert just in one domain. We need to at least be facile across multiple different areas, and then engage multidisciplinary teams to help us succeed in all of these elements. But that tripartite mission of clinical care, education, and research, I would argue, is even kind of expanding and requiring many of us to take on administrative roles where, maybe we haven't been formally trained, but there's a lot of on-the-job learning that happens. So, most formal leadership training, I certainly didn't have any in residency fellowship. I see now the Stanford residents have a leadership professional development boot camp during their research time, which is fantastic because I think, when you get out into the job market and into your early career, it's hard to carve out the time for those formal coaching sessions and leadership programs. And a lot of them are kind of geared towards more mid-career and senior executive positions, when really what we need to know is how we can start early in being successful. And I think you need to partner all of these kind of technical skills with the non-technical elements, of emotional intelligence. Our other speakers talked about, just being kind, how far that gets you, right? Especially in new environments, and being humble. Being really agile and resilient is also incredibly important. So I tried to boil this down to 3 kind of main take-home messages. The first one is really having a very good understanding of yourself and your why. So we all have our reasons as to why we went into medicine and surgery and then surgical critical care. But, taking that a step further, I think, at this stage in your career is trying to understand what really excites you and propels you forward, and what you really want to kind of make the main focuses of your career, whether those are particular clinical disciplines or certain areas. If you may get really excited by QI and administration, and some people have a really strong passion for bench research. Other people have taken more creative pathways. They've done non-traditional fellowships, including palliative care, et cetera, during their training. So really kind of understanding how you want to carve out your own niche into the profession is critical. And so that really helps guide you forward, so that when you do encounter those challenges, you kind of have your own internal compass, and knowing what's driving you, and knowing that you'll figure out how to kind of get to the next step, and you'll get through things. And that's what helps to build resilience. One of the things that I did when I took the East Early Career Development Leadership Program, so I'll put in a great plug for that program. And one of the things they had us do was to complete a DISC profile before the course. And it's kind of a personality test, but it's sort of distilled down to various leadership styles and how you work how you work with others. And I think doing something like that, or another kind of similar evaluation online, they have a number of free ones, is just really a good kind of fun exercise that you could even do in your teams or with your co-fellows to kind of help understand your internal strengths, and then maybe your potential blind spots, and then how you can work together to kind of help potentiate each other's success. And so asking yourself questions like, what am I passionate about? What matters most to me? How do I like to lead in a team, right? On rounds, what feels comfortable for me and what doesn't? Are you naturally a little bit more introverted? You kind of like to listen, get everyone's opinions, or are you the person that's kind of quick to make decisions and maybe speaking out a little bit more? So thinking about that in the context of what roles are a good natural fit for me, and what things where I might need to kind of step a little bit more out of my comfort zone. And so with that, I think, we've already touched upon this a lot today, but mentorship is so key, because it's so important to ask people that you trust, to kind of give you a bit of a 360-degree eval of what they perceive as your natural strengths, what they feel like you really excel at, and, how you can kind of work on that professional development plan to become the expert that you want to be. So the second point is carving out a strong professional development plan and mentorship team. And so with this, embracing really the new aspects of a program. So whether that be your fellowship or the first job that you take, and, no matter how short that time is, whether it's a year or longer, just being really crystal clear about setting your personal milestones and understanding the environment that you work in, and aligning yourself with that program's mission and vision, I think will help to make you very successful. And then really becoming engaged as well, not only in the curriculum and just taking it at face value, but, understanding the opportunities that you have to contribute to that curriculum development, so that you could kind of maximize your benefit across multiple areas. And this is important even in fellowship. I think, there's so much pressure, right, to kind of hone those clinical skills in your 1 year of critical care training, or say if you're doing a 2-year fellowship, a AAST fellowship that follows, with a acute care surgery year. I think we do a really great job at placing a lot of focus on the clinical training, and ensuring as much exposure to diverse clinical scenarios. But I would encourage you, just as the other speakers have mentioned today, to kind of use that opportunity to see how you're going to navigate not only your clinical work, but then balance your interests, whether it be in research or education or administrative responsibilities. So, I think having discussions with potential mentors and people who are doing research in your areas of interest early, when you arrive at a new institution, is huge, because then you'll have the opportunity to kind of map out those goals and see where you can plug in, and then kind of take the research in your own direction. And then taking a really proactive approach to your teaching style. So soliciting a lot of feedback, working on that mindset of being already a junior attending, really kind of helps refine some of those skills, thinking of people that you really admire in terms of educators and emulating their style, as was already mentioned. I think that's a huge part of your training, and what you should be kind of actively soliciting feedback on. And then in terms of administration, in our fellowship, we try to really engage our fellows in the QI process. And so we encourage them to start joining some of our hospital and school of medicine quality improvement meetings, whether it's on the trauma side or the critical care side, because that's going to be a big component of your faculty life. And it's important to kind of learn how to navigate those meetings, do reviews of case complications, identify opportunities for improvement. And then we also provide them with opportunities, and this is something I would actively seek out. Try and shadow different administrative leaders, whether it's your patient care manager, nurse leader, in the ICU, or someone in the quality department, just to kind of get an understanding of these different leadership roles and how they tie into your particular role in the hospital, and maybe give you an idea of future opportunities that you'd want to pursue. In terms of mentorship, we put out this paper after a lunch session that we held at the one of the AAST meetings a couple of years ago. And, this was a great learning opportunity for me, because what we did was partner either fellows or junior faculty with more senior mentors that had really, helped shaped people's career. And by the end of this, I think everyone felt, including the senior mentors, like they had learned something from the lunch session and all the questions and comments that came out of it. So we turned it into a paper. And the take home of this is that surgeons have ongoing and very diverse and complex mentorship needs across multiple different areas, right? But when done well, a mentor-mentee relationship can encompass multiple facets of your professional development and really help you to build successful careers. It's never going to be a one-size-fits-all, and it might vary significantly depending on the context and your particular goals across any of these areas that we discussed. And then it can also come in many forms. So I'm sure many of you have heard about some of the nuances between, somebody who comes in as a coach who helps you work on, a particular skill set or performance for a finite period of time, versus a more longitudinal mentor, versus a sponsor that maybe you don't have as close of a relationship with, but that will put a good word in for you, for example, to help secure a job, or to become involved in professional societies. So in all of these situations, it's all about being proactive identifying those individuals and then seeking feedback from them in an ongoing fashion. It's not likely that you're going to find one person who can kind of fulfill all your needs across all areas. So I think, the people that have been most successful have built a team of mentors where they can seek guidance in various areas of their career and then leverage the unique strengths of each mentor. So it might be a different person that you go to for your research interests versus a clinical mentor. And then even, mentorship can come as well from peer-to-peer support and seeking out mentorship in small groups of individuals who are sort of, going through similar things. And then I'll just end on this concept that we've already discussed, and that's challenging yourself, stepping outside of your comfort zone. And then with that, knowing, when to say yes to opportunities versus when to say no. And I think this is a really difficult one that many of us still struggle with. And, it's an acquired skill over time. My personal bias is that I think, saying yes more often than not, especially when you're earlier on in your career, can lead to really exciting, unexpected opportunities. And I think, there is a bit of that expectation to say yes than more than no. But it's also about being realistic about how you can, how much time you can actually devote to something. You want to be able to commit to something and actually do a good job at it, right? And not, fail to meet the expectations and have a good understanding of whether or not something will get you closer to your goals. So going back to point number one and knowing your why. I put a couple of pictures up here. A few years ago, the associate membership of the AAST was not in existence. So that's all resident, fellow, and then early career faculty within the first 7 years of their career. It was something that just kind of formed in 2019 under the leadership of some of the board of the AAST. And then the following year, they solicited for an executive council of that, including a chair, vice chair, et cetera. And, through a combination of mentors and sponsors, I ended up working up the courage to apply for the chair position of this. And that definitely involved a lot of these concepts that we talk about of stepping outside of your comfort zone. I'm naturally a little more introverted. And so I think, the idea of leading a large group of individuals on a national scale seemed really daunting to me. But it was kind of a leap of faith that I took that has been one of the most rewarding professional experiences that I've had to date, because as you can see, I had the opportunity to work with such an incredible team of talented trainees across the country that have now become lifelong friends. And then they've gone on to kind of grow the associate membership to well over 700 individuals now. And, there's leadership opportunities across areas of education, communications, research, you name it. So really exciting times ahead. And I think it all boils down to, people talk a lot about luck. I think it's a combination of opportunity and preparation, and then that willingness to take a little bit of a risk. So I just want to thank you all and welcome any questions. These are a couple key takeaways. And then I put some examples of some leadership workshops across the various professional societies that have sponsored the talk today. And happy to answer any questions now, or this is my contact if you want to reach out offline. Thanks so much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you. I think you taught me a lot of things and helped reinforce things. I really like the themes that I heard going through all of your discussions about being comfortable, being uncomfortable, and kind of embracing uncertainty, seeking out feedback. And I really liked the idea of bi-directional feedback, making sure you're sitting down with your mentees and even your other faculty and asking for feedback in both directions. I think that that's a really valuable point that all of us can learn from. and then mentors and getting involved early and really taking on those opportunities that you have. So Pat, do you have any, while we're waiting for hopefully some questions from our audience? Do you
Yeah,
have
I had a few questions to go through here. So we'll start with Dr. Masch. So you had a really prescient point about gaps in your previous training that kind of guides your fellowship experiences. So for those that are looking for fellowship positions, what resources did you use to kind of identify which programs might fill in those gaps as you were kind of looking for programs, and how did you kind of use those gaps as ways to seek out programs as you did the interview trail?
I think it's about asking questions and sort of having that self-reflection, you know, before you really start the process. When we would talk to the fellowship applicant groups, even this year, it's kind of like, you know, you look at your residency training, you're like, oh, do I want a lot of penetrating trauma because I feel more comfortable with blunt? Or, you know, did I have a really small ICU and I didn't get a lot of critical care experience, and I've never been in a CVICU before, and sort of the opportunities that you can ask, because, you know, half of the interview is being asked what questions you have. So actually making a long list of questions that you ask can help you figure it out. I know I had my own list of ones that I asked at every program, which I consider to be gaps in my residency. And I just wanted to know that I would be somewhere that would help me fill those in.
Perfect.
Fantastic. We do have a question from the audience I want to make sure gets answered. And maybe this one could be for Dan or Dr. Knowlton. What was most instrumental in securing your first job out of fellowship?
I mean, I was very lucky that my program director here liked me enough to write me a letter of recommendation to get a job here at the university. But I think it goes back to the common theme is mentorship. You can rely on your mentorship from residency. You can lean on your mentors in fellowship. You can even lean on, you know, if you have a family of doctors and, you know, help make calls for that. But I think once you finish your fellowship, you kind of have an idea whether or not you want to go into academics, private practice, and, you know, a piece of advice that I was told by my old program director of residency, because when I was finishing up my fellowship, I applied or sought out opportunities in the community and in academics. And he really made me self-reflect and think about what I wanted in my career. And he made a very poignant point that if you are thinking about academics and or the community, it would probably be the safest thing to start out in academics. And then if it's not for you, to then seek out the community, that it might be a little bit more difficult going the opposite direction of going into the community and then realizing that you don't really like it and then seeking an academic job.
Lisa, as a fellow colleague who helps their fellows find positions leaving your institution, what things do you recommend for fellows as they're preparing? I know it's early in the year, but everybody's always starts the year like thinking about, oh gosh, I'm going to have to get another job in another year or two.
Yeah, I think the key thing is to start early. And so it's, you know, even now, I mean, I know there's postings going up. Somebody else asked in the chat, you know, is it a combination of discussing with mentors or websites? So it really is all of the above. You know, these three societies are having a virtual job fair in the next couple of months. So it'll give you an opportunity to kind of formally see what's listed. But I would stock websites, talk to people. The AAST meeting is coming up, as is East. So there's a lot of networking involved. So reaching out to mentors, sponsors, to see what's available, because not everything is always publicized. And then just having a good sense of what your non-negotiables are, I think is important, because unlike a fellowship where you're going somewhere for a year or two, you know, you're hoping to ideally stay in your first job, you know, at least for a few years and start to build a successful career. So just understanding what you're really looking for and you know, what your hard stops are, I think is really important. And a little element of it is also luck and timing, because you know, each year there's certain places that have just hired the year prior that maybe you don't have anything available. So just getting a good sense of you know, what opportunities exist.
Yeah, if I may add to that, you know, it's amazing what a small world it is. And so talking to your mentors, not just your program directors and your chiefs, but all the other people, other faculty, and really knowing what you want. I think definitely have your non-negotiables, but also be open to the ideas of places you may not have thought about going. I think those are the fellows who I've really had who have been the most successful in finding the job they absolutely love, is kind of being willing to look around a little bit. But I think it's a fun and exciting time, and starting early is definitely a good thing.
And remember, the Midwest isn't just for flying over, okay? Yeah.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that, Lisa, that you talked about was finding mentors, and you know, people ask me about finding mentors all the time. Should they be assigned? How do you find them? What is your kind of philosophy or guidance on finding and identifying your team of mentors?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit different than in residency, where you get, you know, usually several years to work with a number of different faculty, and you kind of have that time to identify people that are, you know, seem to be working in your area of interest and whatnot. Fellowship is a very compressed timeline, and it takes you a few months to really just kind of get to know personalities. So for that, I would say really ideally rely on your program directors, meet with them early in the year. Be explicit about your goals and the type of mentorship that you're seeking. And ideally, they will be able to, if it's not them personally, direct you to individuals that you should meet with. And I would also be really proactive in that process and try to meet with, you know, all the faculty in the first month or two of being there, just to, you know, get a good sense of engagement and see who might be a good fit.
Fantastic. Patrick, other questions that you might have?
Yeah, a couple more here, but we'll see what we can get through. I guess for Daniel here, so you talked about tailoring your education as a staff to students. So the classic challenge that we face in fellowship and as a staff is the disengaged or disinterested student.
Mhm.
So how do you find ways to engage those students when you're dealing with them? Because I think it's a really important skill as an educator that you need to hone.
I think it's more of like a show don't tell type of mentality that I feel that even a disengaged learner, if they see the leader being engaged and excited, and if they feel that that educator is there for them, and kind of going back to what I was talking about, commiserating, that as a young faculty, you know, you're closer to their training than they are. But I think building them up for, you know, things that they do well, and kind of not sweating the small stuff really goes a long way.
Very good. And oh yeah, that's very good. Thank you. That hits it on the nail on the head there. And Lisa, one question I had for you. So you talked about the balance between yes and no, and that's a really important thing early in your career. So you feel like you're constantly having people pushing you to take on new projects, new roles, especially early on. So in your own personal experience, how did you balance that, and how did you learn to balance all those offered roles with your personal goals?
Yeah, I think
We could
it's
probably talk for hours about that. I'm sure.
no, I know. I think it's probably something that we all still struggle with. And it's a combination of, I probably said yes more than I said no, especially early on. Because, you know, at the beginning, you're trying to understand what are my interests, what are my strengths, where do I really want to focus? And so saying yes more often than no really helps you kind of identify those areas that you want to kind of hone in on. And then you can, as you build relationships and rapport with people, you could say, you know, thanks so much for considering me for this. It sounds super exciting, but I want to be mindful of, you know, doing a good job in this X position. So, you know, this might not be the best timing for me, et cetera. So I think, long story short, you know, after a period of saying yes and really getting a good sense of where your areas of interest lie, then you can start to kind of narrow in a little bit more. You just, I think, never want to be in that situation where you're overcommitting and not able to deliver, because then, you know, you come across as unreliable, and people will probably not approach you going forward.
That is a very important point.
Very important. I
Yeah.
agree 100%.
Yeah, it's also, I also find it helpful if you need to say no, maybe saying, you know, this isn't the thing for me right now, but I know somebody else who it is the thing
Yes.
for. Would really
Right.
suggest you,
Right.
and being a sponsor for other people in those circumstances is also an opportunity. Well, I think we're just down to the very last bit of the hour. And I don't see any other questions in our chat, but I just wanted to give each of you an opportunity to maybe give us a one final kind of succinct pearl or thing that you want to make sure everybody comes away from this hour with. We'll start with Jessie.
I would say for my last words, be bold and be really open and flexible in your thinking, and that will serve you really well in fellowship.
Fantastic. Dan?
I think, you know, finding your academic phenotype is really important early on. You know, seeking mentors, not only in your division, but throughout the hospital. You know, your chaplain in the hospital could be a mentor, nursing could be a mentor, anybody can be a mentor in the hospital and really provide you with a lot of different perspective. And give the carrot, not the stick, to your, you know, your students and your trainees, and commiserate and be patient.
Fantastic. And Lisa?
Yeah, I think don't be afraid to lean on others, even if you're at a new institution and you don't know people well, you know, have people, you know, reach out for you on your behalf in terms of, you know, making connections for jobs and whatnot. Really kind of lean on your team to help you, and I think that'll help guide you, and then be grateful.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. I certainly could not summarize it any better than that. I really appreciate your final words, and thank you all for joining us today. And we wish everybody who's joined on today, if you're a brand new fellow or starting your second year, the best of luck in the next year. And know that there's a lot of people out there who are willing to be your mentors and resources. And we look forward to seeing where all of you go. So thank you so much.